For 40 years, they saw me as the quiet wife, a polite accessory on my powerful husband's arm. I think my daughter-in-law, Sloane, truly believed I was just a fragile old woman. So when my husband's lawyer handed me a check for $55 million at the will reading, she didn't hesitate. She snatched it from my hands, struck a match, and burned it to ash right in front of me. She expected me to break down. She expected tears. She did not expect me to smile. She thought she was burning my inheritance, but what she really set on fire was her own life. She had just triggered a trap my husband and I set for her years ago, and I was about to enjoy taking back everything she held dear. To follow my story of sweet revenge, make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. Don't forget to give this a like, and let me know in the comments what you think her next move should be. The air in Mr. Harrison's office was as thick and still as the mahogany desk that separated us. For 40 years, this room had marked the sober milestones of my life with Arthur. Business acquisitions, trust formations, and now this. The final entry in the ledger of our life together. My son, Julian, sat stiffly in a leather wingback, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrests. Beside him, my daughter-in-law, Sloane, was a coiled viper in a cream-colored dress that cost more than most people's first car. She hadn't shed a single tear at the funeral, but her eyes were sharp now, fixed on the stack of documents in Mr. Harrison's hands. She was an expert in calculating value, and my husband's death was, to her, the ultimate transaction. "And finally," Mr. Harrison said, his voice gentle as he looked at me over his spectacles, "to my beloved wife, Abigail Monroe, I leave the remainder of my personal liquidity, held in the Monroe Reserve account." He slid a single crisp document across the polished wood. "As of this morning, that amount is $55 million. A sharp intake of breath came from Sloane. Julian just stared, his expression unreadable. I looked at the document. It was printed on heavy, watermarked paper, designed to look as solid and irrefutable as the fortune it represented. 55 million. Sloane's voice was a silky, incredulous whisper. Before I could even touch it, her hand, tipped with blood-red nails, shot out and snatched the paper. She stood up, her beautiful face a mask of contempt. "This is a joke," she said, her voice rising. "She gets everything, and your own son gets a pittance." "He worshipped you, Arthur," she said, looking at the ceiling as if he were listening. "And this is his reward. To watch his mother, who never worked a day in her life, walk away with his birthright." Julian shifted. "Sloane, maybe we should." "Don't you dare, Julian," she hissed, turning on him. "Don't you dare be weak now." She turned her venomous gaze back to me. "You don't deserve this. You never did. You were just a quiet little mouse he kept on his arm." I met her eyes and held my silence. That was always her mistake, assuming my silence was weakness. With a flourish, she pulled a gold matchbook from her purse. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she struck a match. The flame flared, reflecting in her triumphant eyes. "The Monroe fortune belongs to the future of this family, not the past." And with that, she touched the flame to the corner of the document. Caught instantly. The paper curled, turning black at the edges before orange flame consumed the ink. She held it aloft, a perverse torch, until the heat licked at her fingers. She dropped the last smoldering piece into a crystal ashtray on the desk, where it settled into a pile of gray, weightless ash. Julian looked like he was going to be sick. Mr. Harrison looked at me, his expression carefully neutral, but I saw the question in his eyes. I didn't argue. I didn't cry out or lunge for the burning paper. I just smiled a small, sad, secret smile. Because what she had just set on fire wasn't a check. It was a confession. The ride back in the Bentley was suffocatingly quiet. The air, thick with the scent of Sloane's Chanel No. 5, couldn't quite mask the faint, acrid smell of smoke that clung to her clothes. She sat with her back ramrod straight, radiating a smug satisfaction. She believed she had made a statement, a grand gesture of defiance. Julian just stared out the window, the city lights of Los Angeles blurring into streaks of neon anxiety across his pale face. "Well," Sloane finally said, breaking the silence. Someone had to do it. He'll thank me later. She glanced at me, expecting a reaction. Protest, tears, anything. I offered nothing. I simply looked out my own window, my reflection a placid mask in the dark glass. My lack of response was a far greater irritant to her than any argument could ever be. She huffed and fell silent again, her victory tasting less sweet in the face of my calm. My mind wasn't in the car with them. It was on the veranda 3 months ago. The late afternoon sun was warm on my skin, and a gentle breeze rustled the bougainvillea. Arthur was frail, tucked under a cashmere blanket in his wheelchair, but his eyes were as sharp as they'd ever been. He held my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "They're going to be vultures, you know," he had said, his voice raspy but clear. "They'll think the old man is gone, and the gentle lady of the house is easy prey." "Let them think that," I'd replied, squeezing his hand. He'd smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "That's my girl. The plan is in motion. Harrison knows his part. But the final move, the checkmate, that's up to them." He paused, looking out over the rolling hills of our estate. "They will show their true colors, Abby. You just have to give them the stage. And when they do, you show them no mercy. You honor our life, not their greed." The car pulled through the grand gates of our Bel Air home. As the driver opened my door, Sloane's voice, sharp and impatient, cut through the air. "Well, aren't you going to say anything? Don't you realize what I just did for your son?" I finally turned to look at her, my expression serene. "I realize it perfectly, Sloane," I said, my voice even. "You have no idea." The next morning I was back in Mr. Harrison's office. The scent of yesterday's drama had been replaced by the familiar smell of old books and fresh coffee. There was no tension in the air now. The mood was one of quiet confirmation, like two generals reviewing a successful maneuver. "He would have been proud, Abigail," Mr. Harrison said, handing me a cup of coffee. "He worried, you know, that her audacity wouldn't rise to the occasion." "Arthur knew how to read people," I said, taking a sip. "Greed is never shy." Mr. Harrison permitted himself a small, grim smile. He opened a different folder on his desk, one that Sloane and Julian had not seen. "Let's review," he said, "all business now." The document Sloane Monroe so theatrically destroyed was not a bank draft. It was, as you know, a legally binding document we drafted called a conditional inheritance acknowledgement. It was the final test. He pointed to a paragraph in his copy. Clause 7b of Arthur's will states that the primary inheritance is contingent upon the beneficiaries, namely you, Julian, and by extension his spouse, formally accepting the terms of the estate with respect and gratitude. The acknowledgement was the instrument of that acceptance. He looked up at me. "By snatching it from you and willfully destroying it in an act of malice, witnessed by both the estate's executor and another beneficiary, she has irrevocably violated Clause 7b. And the consequence?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The consequence," Mr. Harrison said with a note of finality, "is that both Julian and Sloane Monroe are immediately and completely disinherited from the Monroe primary fortune. Every last dollar." A wave of sorrow, sharp and profound, washed over me. Not for the money, but for the son I had lost long before I lost his father. Arthur had given him every chance to be a better man. This was simply the final, formal recognition that he had failed. "They are left with only what is in their personal bank accounts," Mr. Harrison continued, "which, knowing their spending habits, won't last them through the season." I nodded slowly, pushing the grief down and letting resolve take its place. "Then let's proceed to the next phase, Charles." The first ripple of the earthquake reached Sloane on Rodeo Drive. I heard the story later from a friend on a charity board, who recounted it with barely concealed glee. Sloane had apparently gathered a few of her fawning friends for a celebratory shopping spree at Chanel, a public declaration that she was now the true matriarch of the Monroe family. After piling the counter high with handbags and shoes, she presented her Platinum American Express card with a regal air. The card was declined. She laughed it off, blaming it on a new teller. It was declined again. Her laugh became brittle. The store manager was called. A third attempt, a third silent rejection. The public humiliation was, by all accounts, exquisite. Her friends melted away, suddenly remembering other appointments, leaving Sloane in a cold fury, yelling at a poor bank representative over the phone. At the same time, across town in his sleek Century City office, Julian was facing his own quiet catastrophe. He attempted to make a wire transfer from the family trust, a little seed money, for a new, ill-conceived tech venture. The transaction was blocked. When he called the private banker who had catered to his every whim for a decade, he was met with a polite but firm stone wall. "I'm sorry, Mr. Monroe, but all assets tied to the Monroe Family Trust have been suspended pending a full probate review as stipulated by the estate executor." Suspended? What does that mean? Julian had sputtered. "Who's the executor?" "The primary executor," the banker replied coolly, "is your mother, Abigail Monroe." The panic must have hit him like a physical blow. The bottomless well from which he had drunk his entire adult life had suddenly, inexplicably, run dry. It was nearly 10 o'clock when they stormed my house. I didn't need the housekeeper to announce them. I heard the roar of Julian's sports car in the driveway and the slam of its doors. I was in the library reading, a glass of sherry by my side. I had been waiting for them. They burst in, Sloane in the lead, her face blotchy with rage, Julian trailing behind her, looking lost and terrified. "What did you do?" Sloane demanded, her voice shaking. "Our accounts are frozen. The cards are shut off. This is your doing." I placed a bookmark in my novel and looked at them calmly. "My doing? Sloane, that's a terrible accusation. I've been right here all day." "Don't play dumb with us," she shrieked. "The bank said you suspended the trust. You're cutting us off." I turned my gaze to my son. "Julian, is this true? Is there a problem with the bank?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom, we just need to know what's going on. It's just a temporary hold, right? Mr. Harrison can fix this." I took a slow sip of my sherry, letting the silence stretch. I let them stew in their own fear, their entitlement curdling into desperation. "I don't understand why you're both so worried," I said softly, my voice laced with a gentle, feigned confusion that I knew would infuriate them. "Arthur left us all very well provided for. The money is there, isn't it?" Sloane stared at me, her mind racing, finally beginning to suspect that the game being played was far more complex than she had imagined. She looked from my calm face to the ashes in the fireplace, where I'd had the housekeeper sweep the remains from Mr. Harrison's ashtray. For the first time since I'd known her, Sloane looked truly afraid. My smile didn't even have to be feigned. The Monroe Enterprises boardroom was Arthur's sanctuary. It smelled of steel and success, a place where titans of industry made decisions that shaped skylines. The 10 board members, all men who had known me for decades as Arthur's quiet wife, looked at me with a mixture of pity and apprehension as I took my husband's seat at the head of the table. They were expecting a grieving widow to rubber-stamp their decisions. They were not prepared for the woman Arthur had spent 40 years mentoring in private. "Good morning, gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and steady. "As you know, with Arthur's passing, his controlling shares have transferred to me. I have spent the weekend reviewing the Q4 reports, and I have some concerns." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. Specifically, with the performance and expenditure reports from the Ventures division. I saw a flicker of panic in the eyes of a few members who were friendly with my son. Julian's Ventures division was a notorious black hole for cash, a vanity project Arthur had allowed, foolishly, as a way to keep him occupied. "Therefore," I continued, "effective immediately, I am commissioning a full, independent forensic audit of the division, dating back 5 years. All project funding will be frozen pending the results of that audit." A stunned silence fell over the room. It was a declaration of war. I had taken my first piece from the board, and it was my own son. My second cut was more direct. Later that day, I called the staffing agency that supplied Julian and Sloane with their small army of housekeepers, landscapers, and pool boys. "This is Abigail Monroe," I said to the manager. "Due to the unexpected complexities and delays in the settling of my late husband's estate, we must unfortunately be prudent. Please suspend all services to the property on Alpine Drive effective tomorrow morning. We will be in touch when the financial situation is clarified." I hung up, imagining Sloane waking up the next morning to a silent, empty house. No coffee brewed, no breakfast cooked, no one to draw her bath. Her lavish world was beginning to shrink, and the walls were closing in. Sloane's identity was built on a foundation of other people's envy. Her social standing was her life's work, and the annual Children's Foundation Gala was to be her coronation. As the new chairwoman, she had made a spectacle of her generosity, pledging a staggering $250,000 in the Monroe name. A pledge made, of course, against a fortune she did not possess. I did not attend the gala, but the day before the event I made a phone call. "Good afternoon, Cynthia," I said to the gala's director. "This is Abigail Monroe. I'm calling regarding the pledge made for your wonderful event. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing probate process, the Monroe estate is unable to release any discretionary funds at this time. We'll have to rescind the pledge." There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line. "But, Abigail, Sloane is the chair. The budget is built around that donation." "I am truly sorry for the inconvenience," I said, my voice dripping with false regret. "Sloane must have been a little overzealous. I'm sure you understand." The fallout was, by all accounts, spectacular. The news ripped through the charity committee like wildfire. Sloane was forced to make a humiliating announcement at the final pre-gala meeting. She was publicly stripped of her chairmanship. My phone rang all the next day with calls from my friends, all eager to give me a blow-by-blow account of Sloane's disgrace, their voices a symphony of feigned sympathy and delicious schadenfreude. Sloane had tried to buy respectability, but when the money vanished, all she was left with was the bill for her own arrogance. The memory came to me unbidden one night, as I sat alone in Arthur's study. It was from 2 years ago. I had come looking for him and found him staring into the fireplace, his face etched with a pain so deep it startled me. "What is it, my love?" I had asked, rushing to his side. He tried to wave it off, but I persisted. Finally he confessed. He had just discovered a wire transfer. Julian, after a disastrous trip to Macau, had embezzled nearly $3 million from the ventures division to pay off a gambling debt to a very unsavory syndicate. Arthur had spent the entire day moving his own personal funds to cover the hole, burying his son's crime so deep it would never be found. "He is my son," Arthur had whispered, his voice cracking with a shame that wasn't his. "But he does not have my character, Abby. He has a hole in his soul that he tries to fill with money and thrills. He'd made me promise not to speak of it, to spare me the pain and to spare Julian the consequences. It was the only secret I believe he ever kept from me. It was the moment he knew, I think, that his son was a lost cause." The next morning Mr. Harrison called. His voice was grim. "The auditors found it, Abigail," he said. $3 million siphoned to an offshore account and paid out to a casino financing group in Macau. It's a clean trail. It's unambiguous." "I know," I said softly. Arthur's final act of protection was now gone. Without his father to cover for him, Julian was no longer just an irresponsible son. He was a common criminal. Mr. Harrison summoned Julian and Sloane to his office a week later. I did not attend, but I had him arrange a conference call so I could listen from the library. They sounded weary, their bravado replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. "We are here," Mr. Harrison began, his tone formal and cold, "to discuss the ramifications of your violation of Clause 7B of the will." "Violation?" Sloane snapped, her voice sharp. "We didn't violate anything. We were disrespected." "The probate court, I assure you, will see it differently," Mr. Harrison countered smoothly. "Your actions have triggered Clause 11, the estate's default clause. As you have been formally disinherited from the primary fortune, I am legally bound to execute the will's alternative instructions. He let a beat of silence pass. I could picture them leaning forward, hanging on his every word. The entirety of the $55 million, along with the controlling shares of Monroe Enterprises, does not return to the estate. Instead, it is to be transferred in its entirety to a charitable foundation established by Mr. Monroe in the weeks prior to his death. A foundation. Julian's voice was faint. What foundation? Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. I knew he was savoring this moment. It is to be called the Arthur Monroe Foundation for Integrity and the Arts. The words were a slap in the face. Integrity, the one quality my son so profoundly lacked. And the arts, a world Sloane had always mocked as a frivolous waste of time and money for the poor. Arthur wasn't just disinheriting them. He was twisting the knife. This is insane, Sloane sputtered over the speakerphone. It's theft. We will fight this. We will sue this foundation. You are welcome to try, Mr. Harrison said calmly. But you should know that the foundation has already been legally chartered and its governance structure finalized. Arthur was very specific. And who, Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper, is running it? Who's the director? This was the checkmate Arthur had planned. This was the move that would take them from ruin to utter helplessness. The will is very clear on that point as well, Mr. Harrison said. The foundation is to have a single sole director, who holds the titles of president and CEO, with full and indisputable control over all its assets and decisions. He paused. I held my breath listening. The director of the Arthur Monroe Foundation, he announced, is your mother, Abigail Monroe. The sound that came through the speaker was not a word. It was a raw, guttural cry of disbelief from Sloane. It was followed by a heavy thud and a panicked shout from Julian. I pictured my son kneeling over his wife, who had likely fainted from the sheer shock of her defeat. He finally understood. This wasn't a banking error. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a perfectly executed demolition, and I was the one holding the detonator. The war for the Monroe fortune was over. I had won. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Stripped of their wealth and social standing, Sloane and Julian did what cornered animals do. They bit back, blindly and foolishly. They hired a man named Marcus Thorne, a pit bull of a lawyer whose slick television ads ran after midnight, promising to fight for victims of estate fraud. Thorne came out swinging. He filed a motion to contest the will, citing undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. He claimed I had manipulated a sick, dying Arthur into writing a will that benefited me and my pet projects, while cruelly disinheriting his only son. It was a vile, baseless accusation, and it was the single greatest mistake they could have made. To prove his case, Thorne demanded full discovery of all of Arthur's and Monroe Enterprises' financial records from the past 5 years, hoping to find evidence of my manipulation. Mr. Harrison and I almost laughed when we received the request. They had, with their own lawyer's hand, just given us the legal authority to present the one piece of evidence that would utterly destroy them. In a sealed and court-sanctioned response, Mr. Harrison provided the complete, unredacted forensic audit of Julian's Ventures division. It included bank statements, routing numbers, and sworn testimony from a casino executive in Macau. It was an elegant, undeniable portrait of a $3 million embezzlement. 2 days later, Marcus Thorne filed a motion to withdraw as counsel, citing an irreconcilable conflict with his clients. He didn't want to be anywhere near a case that was about to attract the attention of the district attorney's office. Julian and Sloane were left legally defenseless, having paid their last liquid assets to a lawyer who had only succeeded in handing the executioner his axe. With the legal challenge evaporated, I moved forward with the foundation's first official act. I called a small press conference at a local community center, a humble setting that was a statement in itself. The reporters smelled blood in the water and showed up in droves. I stood at a simple podium, the new logo for the Arthur Monroe Foundation for Integrity and the Arts behind me. I spoke of Arthur's belief that a person's true worth is measured not by what they accumulate, but by the loyalty and kindness they show to others. Our first grant, I announced, is not our largest, but it is our most important. It is a legacy grant, designed to honor someone whose quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty were a constant source of comfort and strength to my husband and me. I then called a woman from the front row. It was Sophia, our housekeeper of 30 years, whom Sloane had fired with less than a day's notice and no severance. She was a good woman who had held my hand at the funeral and cried with me. She looked terrified as she approached the podium. "Sophia," I said, taking her hand. "The foundation is awarding you a grant of $500,000 to thank you for your decades of service and to ensure you have the security you have so richly earned." A gasp went through the room, followed by the frantic clicking of cameras. Sophia burst into tears, and I embraced her. It was an act of genuine gratitude, but it was also a perfectly aimed stone. Every news outlet in the city ran the story. While his own son and daughter-in-law had tried to fleece the estate, Arthur Monroe's widow had given a life-changing fortune to their housekeeper. I had defined the narrative. I was the keeper of Arthur's decent legacy. They were the greedy, ungrateful usurpers. The public humiliation, coupled with the looming threat of criminal charges, was the final wedge that shattered Julian and Sloane's marriage. The call I received was one I had been expecting. It was Julian, his voice choked with panic. "I need to see you," he pleaded. "Alone." He came to the house that evening, looking thin and haunted. The designer clothes hung off his frame, and his eyes were bloodshot. He collapsed into a chair in the library and began to sob, a pathetic, gut-wrenching sound. "It was her," he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "Burning the check, hiring Thorne. It was all Sloane's idea. Who pushed me? She told me you were a weak old woman and that the fortune was ours for the taking. She's a monster, Mom." He was throwing her to the wolves to save himself, the ultimate act of his lifelong cowardice. "I'll do anything," he begged, looking up at me, his face a mess of tears and desperation. "I'll testify against her. I'll tell them how she manipulated me. Just help me. Don't let me go to jail." I looked at my son, this broken man who was a stranger to me, and I felt nothing but a cold, vast emptiness. The love had been hollowed out, leaving only scar tissue behind. "There is nothing I can do for you, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You made your choices. Now you must live with them." He stared at me, his hope dying in his eyes as he finally understood. There would be no rescue. Sloane must have known she was cornered, because she came to my home the next day. There was no begging in her. She was pure, distilled rage, a cornered animal ready for one last futile attack. "You will not win," she hissed, standing in the middle of my foyer, refusing to sit. "I will drag your name and Arthur's through every tabloid in this country. By the time I'm done, this foundation for integrity will be a laughingstock." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "You have nothing, Sloane. No money, no credibility, and a husband who is willing to sell you out to save himself. What could you possibly fight me with?" "He loves me." "He loves his freedom more," I said coldly. "He was just here, offering to testify against you in exchange for my help." The color drained from her face. It was the first time she was truly speechless. I walked closer to her, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You were so wrong about me. You were wrong about Arthur. We saw you from the very beginning. We saw the avarice in your eyes, the contempt in your heart. That document you burned. That was Arthur's final gift to you." She looked at me, utterly confused. "It was a test," I explained, my final smile a mirror of the one I'd given her in the lawyer's office. "He wanted to give you one last chance to prove him wrong. One final opportunity to show an ounce of grace, of gratitude, of simple human decency. All you had to do was not be greedy. And you failed. You thought you were burning my future, but Arthur and I knew you were just lighting your own funeral pyre. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. She had built her entire world on her ability to manipulate others, and she had just been shown that her whole life was the result of a game she never even knew she was playing. My final move was a public one. I held a major press conference at the Museum of Art, announcing the Foundation's first significant initiative, a $10 million fund to revitalize arts education in every public school in Los Angeles. The mayor was there, as were city council members and the press. I was flanked by images of happy children and celebrated artists. I was building a legacy. Halfway through my speech I paused. In the spirit of integrity, I said, my voice ringing with sincerity, the Foundation has provided a full and transparent accounting of its assets to all relevant authorities. We believe in sunlight. It was a signal, nothing more. But it was enough. As if on cue, a commotion started at the back of the room. I continued my speech, not missing a beat, but I saw it all happen out of the corner of my eye. A nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, a process server, was making his way towards Sloane, who had inexplicably shown up, perhaps for one last confrontation. He handed her 2 sets of documents. From my vantage point I could see the captions. The first was a petition for divorce, filed by Julian Monroe. The second was a 3-day notice of eviction from her home, which was now the property of the Foundation. Cameras swiveled from me to her, their flashes erupting like machine gun fire. Her face, caught in the harsh light, was a mask of utter devastation and public ruin. She was trapped, exposed and alone, annihilated not by a scream, but by the quiet, methodical execution of a perfectly laid plan. Checkmate. The weeks that followed the press conference were a quiet storm of legal proceedings and tabloid headlines. I observed it all from a distance, like watching a ship sink below the horizon after a long and brutal battle. Julian, facing overwhelming evidence, accepted a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to felony financial malfeasance. The Monroe name and my quiet influence spared him prison time, but the sentence was its own kind of prison. He was given 5 years of probation, a multi-million-dollar restitution order payable to the Foundation, and a court order barring him from ever holding a corporate officer position again. His name was ruined. He vanished from the world we knew, retreating into a self-imposed, shame-filled exile. Sloane's fate was less formal but just as final. The divorce was swift and uncontested. With no assets to her name and a reputation that was now radioactive, she was a pariah. The final photograph I saw of her was a grainy paparazzi shot on the cover of a gossip magazine. She was pumping her own gas into a beat-up Honda Civic somewhere in Arizona, looking tired and anonymous. The viper had been defanged and declawed, left with nothing but the poison of her own memory. Mr. Harrison managed the legalities. I simply read the reports he sent over, each one a final nail in the coffin of a life that was. There was no joy in it, no triumph. There was only a profound and heavy sense of closure. The debt had been paid. 6 months later, I stood in the sun-drenched courtyard of an elementary school in East Los Angeles. The air, once thick with tension and deceit, was now filled with the sound of children's laughter and a slightly off-key school orchestra. The Arthur Monroe Foundation had just funded and opened the district's first dedicated arts and music center. The walls, once a dull, institutional beige, were now covered in vibrant, chaotic, brilliant paintings made by 7-year-olds. A young girl with paint on her cheek tugged on my sleeve and proudly showed me a clay sculpture of a lopsided dog. Her smile was the most valuable thing I had seen in years. The mayor gave a speech and thanked me, but I barely heard him. I was watching a group of boys learning guitar chords from a passionate young teacher whose salary was now paid by the Foundation. I was watching the future Arthur had wanted to build. This was the antithesis of Sloane and Julian's world. Theirs was a world of acquisition, of taking. This was a world of creation and giving. For the first time, I understood the true purpose of Arthur's plan. The revenge was not the point. It was just the necessary act of clearing the land so something beautiful and worthy could finally grow. That evening, I finally allowed myself to open the last thing Arthur had left for me. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written in his familiar, strong script. On the back he had written, "To be opened only when it is done." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the wax seal. Inside was not a set of instructions, but a long, handwritten letter. "My dearest Abby," it began. "If you are reading this, then the ugliest part of our life is over. I am sorry I had to ask such a terrible thing of you. I am sorry for the son who broke your heart as much as he broke mine. But I am not sorry for having trusted you. You were always the steel spine of this family, my love. Quiet but unbreakable. Do not let this victory be a monument to bitterness. Let it be a doorway. The money is just metal and paper. The legacy is what you build with it. Build something that brings you joy. Fill your days with art and laughter, not with lawyers and ledgers. Find peace, find purpose, and live a life so full of light that the shadows of the past can no longer reach you. Thank you for 40 years of love. It was the only fortune that ever truly mattered. I will love you always. Yours, Arthur." The tears I shed were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of release. The heavy armor I had worn for the past year fell away, and for the first time since he had gone, I felt the sharp, clean pang of grief for the man I loved, unburdened by the anger at those who had wronged him. Another year passed. The foundation flourished. I traveled, I sat on boards, I learned the names of 100 children. And then, one day, a letter arrived, forwarded by Mr. Harrison. It was from Julian. He was working, he wrote, for a landscaping company in Oregon. He wrote about the simple dignity of physical labor, of watching things grow. It was a short, humble letter. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even ask for forgiveness. He just asked if, the next time I was in the Pacific Northwest, he could buy me a cup of coffee. I went the following month. I found him in a small cafe in Portland. He was thinner and his hands were calloused. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet shame. We talked for an hour about the weather, about the roses he was planting at a client's house, about everything and nothing. Before I left, he finally looked at me directly. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "I know, Julian," I said. It was not absolution. It was not a promise that everything could be as it was. But it was an acknowledgement. Beginning. Redemption is a long road, I told him. But it starts with a single step. Keep walking. He nodded, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. For the first time it looked genuine. I am sitting on the veranda now, in the same spot where Arthur and I laid the first stones of this long, winding path. The sun is setting, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. The air is warm, and the breeze carries the scent of jasmine. It is quiet. Not the tense, suffocating quiet of a chauffeured car, but a deep, peaceful silence. The ghosts are gone. The anger has faded, leaving behind only the clear, bright memories of a life well lived and a love that was strong enough to build a new future from the ashes of a painful past. I think of the children at the art center, of Sophia enjoying her retirement, of my son learning, perhaps, to be a man on his own terms. I think of the good the foundation will do long after I am gone. Arthur was right. The checkmate wasn't the point. It was the move that cleared the board so a new, better game could begin. I look out at the hills, awash in the golden light of the setting sun, and I smile. It is not a smile of secret knowledge or vengeful victory. It is a smile of genuine, unburdened contentment. I am free. And so, my revenge ended not with a bang, but with a quiet peace on my veranda. I destroyed Sloane's world of greed and, from the ashes, built a legacy of hope. But I have to leave one final question for you to answer, and I honestly don't know the right answer myself. After all his weakness and betrayal, I left the door cracked open for my son, Julian, to find redemption. Now you be the judge. Was that the right call? Or should I have destroyed him completely, leaving him with nothing, just like I did to his wife? Let me know in the comments. Type, Team Mercy, if you think he deserved a second chance, or type, Team No Remorse, if you think my revenge should have taken them both down. I'll be reading every single comment to see the final verdict. Thank you for following my journey.